The cosmic assassins were an unmatched force, having spent decades destroying the universe and honing their craft, eliminating all possibility of mistakes. Their techniques were effective, harsh, and precise. No mission had ever failed them, and no target had ever eluded them. With the best technology available, their societies were able to create instruments that could control time and envelop themselves in invisibility and destroy adversaries before they even perceived the danger. The name Count Star's systems made them giggle and feel both awed and afraid. Primitive cultures had little hope against the vulnerabilities of others. They took great satisfaction in being an unstoppable force, a group of people who had long since departed behind their power instead of relying on physical force or reckless violence. Careful preparation, flawless execution, and a reliance on instruments that appeared to less developed beings as magic. For them, dominance was an art form rather than only a chore. When they first heard about Earth, they were amused by the tiny blue planet hidden in an ordinary sky. The accounts depicted a species that depended on primitive technology, making the solar system appear inconsequential. Given ancient customs, they believed that people were just marginally superior to animals, capable of basic developments that particularly drew their notice, even though they were the stories of the so-called assassins on Earth, who worked in the shadows, using weapons like knives, stars, and some think that these Earth assassins, known as smokers, used smoke to accomplish their tasks was absurd. Stories concerning ninjas' cunning and skill were considered to be remnants of a bygone period. Exaggerated and even legendary, the interstellar assassins saw no need for precision. When faced with such a species, their conceit made them oblivious to the difficulties they would soon encounter. Galactic assassins usually targeted people in positions of authority, therefore Earth wasn't their regular target. This expedition was unique in that it dismantled entire planetary systems. Was more of an endeavor to show off their supremacy and pique interest. They wanted to see these Earth assassins for their own benefit, possibly taking advantage of the meeting to make fun of Earth's unsophisticated ways, that their goal was to prove a point rather than to meet a need. Their faith was unwavering as they landed on Earth and reached Japan, a place renowned for its historical connections to ninja legends. Their sophisticated scanning apparatus revealed no indications of the planet's most sophisticated weaponry. In comparison to defenses or technological threats, were like toys to theirs, which they concealed with their gadgets and moved covertly. Started observing, the first few days passed without incident as they examined the people in their immediate vicinity. They broke into historical records, pointing out how simple their lives were. The more they studied the ninja methods, equipment, and ideologies. They also threw cloth disguises, laughed, and threw smoke bombs and stars. They found it all ridiculous that such primitive techniques could be dangerous. Their laughter, however, subsided as they encountered creatures with weapons capable of destroying entire towns in an instant. Found evidence of the ninjas' existence. It began with minor irregularities. Traps were deactivated with surgical precision, and surveillance when motion detectors were activated without any discernible movement. Footage that was inexplicably removed. These incidents were minor, nearly undetectable, but sufficient to create a hurricane. One evening, the Galactic assassins paused because they weren't accustomed to being surprised, and their laughing was completely silent as they passed through the thick woods close to a settlement using their sophisticated tracking. When systems failed, the air seemed thick and nearly lifeless, as though they were being observed, their cloaking systems flickering while they struggled to stay steady. Recognized a problem, but their conceit prevented them from fleeing. That evening was their first contact with Earth's silent killers, but the ninjas didn't disclose that it wasn't a frontal clash. Themselves completely, yet their presence was indisputable. The assassins were caught in traps that their actions appeared to be undetectable, and their plans were anticipated. Disturbed, it seemed as though the ninjas had planned every move before they arrived at the cosmic. Despite their initial fear, assassins felt a weakness they hadn't felt in generations: bewilderment. They explained the incidents away as coincidences or mistakes in their apparatus, but they refused to dismiss the meetings as coincidences because they didn't think that people, with their archaic ways, could be a serious threat. Though they were certain that they would be superior, a germ of doubt started to develop inside of them, and their hues wouldn't allow them admit it. But the cosmic assassins were beginning to view Earth differently than they had previously. Considering it to be basic and antiquated was turning out to be erratic and hazardous. Their arrogance had caused them to undervalue the flexibility that made Earth's silent killers so powerful. Cleverness and their capacity to take advantage of even the smallest flaws. As the assassins got ready for their next move, they maintained their external confidence while their thoughts were racing. The fact that they had come to Earth was disturbing, since they didn't fully comprehend what they were dealing with. Anticipating a simple victory and an opportunity to make fun of the so-called assassins, but instead they were starting to observe how the game had evolved, and the cosmic assassins were no longer merely a myth, and why the ninjas were more than just that. Laughing ninjas were masters of stealth, and more than just legendary figures. Accuracy and survival skills developed over decades of rigorous training. Despite their apparent simplicity, the techniques were based on knowledge of human behavior, the environment, and they employed the art of deception rather than overwhelming firepower or raw force. Rather, their abilities were subtly effective and consistently unexpected at times. Their fundamental ninjas combined physical agility with a philosophy of balance. To outmaneuver opponents, mental acuity and emotional control were essential, and every action was planned. Their weapons are frequently disregarded, as are all of their tools and extensions of the body and intellect. When made intentionally, a basic shuriken might disarm an adversary. A smoke bomb wasn't only a tool to block vision, it was also a means to divert attention or spread poison. The surroundings and made gaps where none existed outside of their equipment, which is what made ninjas so amazing. Their capacity to blend in with the turmoil of combat, both physically and mentally, was something they knew how to control. The training wasn't restricted to using light, shadow, and sound to blend in with the background. Street protection to ensure that they had clear fire lines in the country, via skydiving biocontrolled discs. Combat, but also went so far as to blend in with the people by pretending to be someone else and entering enemy ranks without creating a panic. For them, the battle was frequently won before it started, and their tactics weren't limited to ninjas with individual skills. Functioned as a cohesive team. With each member doing a particular function, they used nonverbal cues to convey information that were invisible to outsiders, and their unity enabled them to carry out intricate surgical skills. Their precision and perfect coordination made them more powerful than the sum of their individual parts. Early on in their training, new initiates learned endurance by climbing steep slopes and carrying big burdens. Terrain and persevering through difficult circumstances, bodily discomfort served as a lesson in resilient mental exercises, like completing puzzles under pressure, helped them focus better. But the objective wasn't a ninja has to be ready for everything and able to respond in order to develop adaptability as well as power quickly to shifting conditions. A large portion of their success stemmed from their profound comprehension of their surrounds. They could use the topography to their advantage, forests, mountains, and cities, and read the area like a book. Their surroundings developed into extensions of their skills. Each rock, tree, and shadow was controlled by their skills. This environmental mastery made them unexpected as a possible ally. Ninja's code of behavior was equally important because they could disappear into the wilderness and reappear in unexpected places. Following the tenets that put the objective above all else, honor wasn't about fame or renown. Rather, it was about efficacy, and they worked in secret, making sure that even when their presence was suspected, their names remained hidden because their deeds spoke louder than words. Shrouded in mystery, this discipline preserved their legend and kept their adversaries guessing. Ninjas were not only skilled at outwitting their adversaries, but also in psychological warfare. Warfare that manipulates the narrative to instill fear and uncertainty in their opponents' minds. In a dispute, they may lower spirits and gain an edge before any actual conflict took place. As important as being able to combat the Galactic assassins for everyone was being able to anticipate and control the activities of the opponent. They were unable to understand this style of thinking because of their technological dominance. Strength in terms of weapons and firepower, ignoring the importance of tact and strategy to ninjas. Because they didn't fully comprehend the assassins, these outsiders were noisy and noticeable while using tools. They were oblivious to the simplicity and efficacy of the ninjas' techniques because they were so confident in their technology. Their instruments as means of improving their abilities rather than as crutches. A kunai, for example, it might be used as a weapon, a climbing aid, and a diversion tool. The understanding of machines made them able to use them in less than 10 seconds. They had an advantage in rendering enemies helpless without engaging in direct combat, thanks to poisons and antidotes which they used on a daily basis. Since they were weapons, the Galactic assassins were never fully disarmed. Ninjas were aware of any encroachment on their domain and were sensitive to their surroundings in ways that went beyond bodily senses. Variations in the atmosphere, animal behavior, and minute changes in locating. The ninjas didn't rush to face these intruders because their energy was sufficient to warn them of the impending danger. Rather, they watched, researched, and prepared their strategy for handling the assassins, were deliberate. They used small disturbances to test their opponent's vulnerabilities. Setting off traps, creating false trails, and interfering with communications weren't just for defense. They served as a way to obtain knowledge on every setback of the jigsaw. Another piece of the jigsaw and another way to take advantage of the ninjas was made possible by assassins' technology. Recognized the value of patience and waited for the ideal opportunity to act rather than acting in fear or rage. The goal of their victory was to outmaneuver the opposition rather than overwhelm them. Their discipline kept them composed. Their clarity of purpose provided them an advantage that no amount of technology could match, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Reproduce the Galactic killers used to controlling their targets found it difficult to adjust to this new type of warfare. They were unable to comprehend how such ostensibly straightforward strategies might defeat their sophisticated technologies. Because of their reliance on technology, they were predictable, which the ninjas took advantage of with disastrous results. Each failure highlighted the disparity between the two strategies for preventing the conflict between the cosmic. The battle between assassins and ninjas was not only one of ability, but also one of assassins symbolized a dependence on outside forces, whilst ninjas represented the mastery of internal discipline. And as the assassins were outmatched in every confrontation, this disparity grew increasingly noticeable. For the Galactic ninjas, superior strategy rather than superior force was used. Assassins were more than just enemies. They were a test of the ninjas' values and the time and effort they had put into their training. Generations honing their art in anticipation of known and unknown threats. The arrival of the assassin was verified, the effectiveness of their strategies demonstrating that even the most sophisticated adversaries may be vanquished with the correct attitude in there. The ninjas' discreet, systematic approach revealed the timeless fact that strength isn't necessarily about what you possess, but how you utilize it. The ninjas depended on their machines, whereas the Galactic assassins used their brains. The distinction between their forefathers' bodies, minds, and knowledge would eventually determine how the conflict between the ninja clan and the Galactic assassins intensified into an unparalleled struggle. Complexity. The assassins used their cutting-edge technology to try to reclaim the hand. Following their early annoyances, they were used to settling disputes by simple technological advantage, and this time they used all of their available resources, including energy and cloaking technology. Surveillance drones and based weapons searched the area for any indication of their elusive opponents. Yet their sophisticated instruments appeared to stutter when confronted with their opponents' erratic behavior. For ninjas, however, every encounter was more than a straightforward battle. Inspired by the final past, they defied the assassins to purge it from the company of other assassins. They avoided facing the assassins directly, since doing so would violate their principles and put them at needless peril. Exposure instead, they employed a complex network of strategies, intended to mislead, divert, and destroy their adversaries' trust. In each action, the assassins performed to bridge the ninjas' created gap, a defense based on years of expertise and an unmatched comprehension of their surroundings. The assassins initially tried to trace the ninjas' movements in the hopes that their technology might reveal a pattern, could map heat signals from miles, identify minute energy changes, and monitor molecular movements in the atmosphere. However, the ninjas were very good at taking advantage of the natural environment, blended in perfectly with their surroundings, using a technique that made it impossible to tell them apart from the surroundings. They employed the soil itself to conceal themselves and set traps for weapons. Manipulating the landscape and compelling the assassins into positions of greater vulnerability, the Galactic assassins, and they felt disillusioned with their dependence on technology after their greatest strength became the ninjas' greatest weakness, was their thorough understanding of human psychology, which they applied to these alien adversaries by the use of distractions, phantom motions, and false trails. They caused mistakes in the assassins' tactics, causing them to chase after illusions and waste time and effort on non-existent targets, which is what the assassins failed to do. To understand was the value of flexibility. Although their technology was accurate and strong, it lacked the dependence of the power that could generally be summarized in the cause and effect of the methods. The ninjas' methods were characterized by their flexibility and intuition, whereas the assassin relied on algorithms and predicted. They were exposed to their opponent's fluid and surprising tactics because of patterns. Every move they made seemed to play right into the hands of the ninjas, who took advantage of this to intensify their psychological combat. They fostered a climate of doubt, transforming the assassin's haughtiness into ambiguity and the traps into more complex, not only rendering their opponents inoperable, but also conveying unambiguous messages with a broken weapon left in a particular place. A set of seemingly arbitrary marks in the earth, these inconspicuous acts sowed the seeds of evolution. The assassins' minds were filled with uncertainty and terror, for a power that flourished on this lack of control and precision was disastrous, and the battle's turning point wasn't a spectacular one. Conflict, but a string of minor, well-thought-out actions that changed the assassins' power dynamics. After the failure of their typical strategies, their attempts to use superior firepower to defeat the ninjas, or their attempts to corner their opponents, were met with stillness, and the result was ambushes that appeared out of nowhere, and the ninjas destroyed their adversaries rather than engaging in traditional combat. This slow change in dynamics is gradually undermining their self-esteem and making them defensive, showed a more profound reality about the nature of war, the assassins. For all their since improvements had shifted to relying on dependable instruments and strategies, they had not encountered a rival who could. They were unable to predict the ninjas' moves since they couldn't think as creatively or adjust as fast as the ninjas. Vulnerable, and their arrogance prevented them from seeing their own shortcomings. For the ninjas, this was not simply a struggle for existence, but also a confirmation of their principles and a development of their capacity for thought adaptation. Critically, under duress and to take advantage of their opponent's vulnerabilities, demonstrated the ongoing significance of their techniques. They showed that real strength originates not from one's possessions, but rather from the capacity to employ those instruments with accuracy and wisdom to combat the galactic killers in spite of. When their first HFYs realized how difficult the situation was, they realized that they had misjudged the ninjas. thinking of them as remnants of a prehistoric past. But as their shortcomings increased, they had to face the fact that the ninjas didn't merely defeat their opponents, who were not only highly skilled but also extremely strategic. They methodically undermined the assassins' self-assurance and authority, which led to a significant change in the assassins' strategy. They began to rely less on technology in an effort to outsmart their rivals. Instead of defeating them, this change arrived too late, and the ninjas had already had the advantage, making the assassins doubt not only their strategies, but also their identity as an unstoppable force. Their mistakes were not only tactical, but also psychologically and logically debilitating. The basis for their conviction that they were better than others by the time the assassins discovered the actual character of their rivals. The ninjas had outwitted them, and the war was already decided. People in every manner, demonstrating that self-gratitude, flexibility, and a thorough awareness of one's surroundings might. Overcoming even the Galactic assassins' most sophisticated technology was a humble experience, one that made them reevaluate what it meant to be truly powerful and revealed the limitations of their strategies. Following their repeated failures, the Galactic assassins started to reconsider what they thought the ninjas were. Once disregarded as archaic human methods, they now seemed to be something much more. The assassin's commander, who had long depended on strategic planning and technological advancements, was intelligent himself. Challenging the presumptions that had led them to believe that ninjas were more than just expert fighters, they were practitioners of an art that combined psychological knowledge, physical expertise, and an intuitive understanding of their adversaries' vulnerabilities. The ninjas' struggle was more than simply overthrowing a superior force. Their deeds were motivated by a higher ideology they thought would lead to, for them, victory was not about maintaining harmony and balance in the face of attack, dominance, but in terms of guaranteeing the protection of their precious beliefs. The Galactic assassins were an existential danger to their lifestyle, as well as to the more general values of modesty and reverence for nature. The ninjas' tactics mirrored this idea. They weren't out to destroy the assassins directly. Rather, they sought to inform them in order to compel them to address their own conceit and excessive dependence on technology, as well as any pitfalls or misdirection. Each uncertain moment worked to both defend their people and teach their adversaries a lesson in flexibility and deference. The Galacticus killers had to face the unsettling reality of their technical developments, which they had always observed. Since their greatest strength was also their biggest weakness, they had grown extremely reliant on one another. They had overlooked the human, or in their case, alien, components of fighting intuition and ingenuity on their equipment. With flexibility, the ninjas were exceptional at these skills, transforming every interaction into a pivotal moment in the assassin's thinking. Did not result from a single incident for their enemies. From the weight of their repeated failures to outsmart the ninjas they encountered, every time they used their technology, they found that they were outwitted and clueless. Nevertheless, these encounters started to change their viewpoint, making them reevaluate the supremacy they had assumed. The ninjas knew that this was a planned result and took it for granted. It took more than just physical combat to overcome an opponent. It also required changing the way the opponent perceived the assassins. The ninjas sought to gain a more durable victory by eroding the assassins' faith in their strategies, one that would make the killers reconsider their strategy for the future and deter them from coming again. The leader of the assassins in particular, started to struggle with the consequences of their failures. He had always thought of strength as being able to dominate technology, but the ninjas had showed him that kind of strength that is based on self-retreat, endurance, and a deep comprehension of nature. Was both transforming and humbling, questioning all of his preconceived notions about what it meant to be a ninja. For their part, they stuck to their values and didn't look for approval or recognition for what they had done. Their objective was to defend their people and maintain their culture, not to degrade the assassins. According to their traditions, they worked with the knowledge that real power requires moderation, and that the greatest protectors are the students of religion, whose greatest combinations are frequently those that leave no trace. He started to view the ninjas as instructors rather than adversaries as a result of these lectures. Even if their approaches were very different from his own, he recognized that they had a certain wisdom that he couldn't ignore. His dependence on technology had made him oblivious to other types of strength. So he started thinking about how these teachings may be applied to his own people. The issue was finally resolved, not by force, but by realizing the humbled by their experiences. Assassins decided to leave Earth not as conquerors, but as learners who have gained a fresh appreciation for the Earth and its inhabitants. The ninjas reached their objective and then vanished into the shadows, their existence only known by the tales of their enemies. Would bring with them the knowledge that the conflict between the ninjas and the cosmic assassins was more than a simple battle of forces. Two mindsets met, each having advantages, disadvantages. Ultimately, it was the ninjas' flexibility to prioritize long-term results and look past the current conflict which enabled them to prevail to success. Prior to Prevalent's triumph, demonstrated not only their talent, but also their insight and dedication to values that went beyond the assassin's battlefield. The experience was a watershed moment for them, brought the principles they had learnt from the ninjas back to their people as humbled seekers of knowledge rather than as victorious warriors, started to shape their strategy for upcoming operations, urging them to prioritize flexibility and deference over brute force. Had arrived on Earth with the intention of making fun of its people. They came away with a greater awareness of their own shortcomings, as well as a fresh respect for the value of simplicity and discipline. The impact of this interaction went beyond the people involved. Nevertheless, it acted as a reminder that having the best or most advanced equipment isn't always a sign of strength. The capacity to adapt, think imaginatively, and act with integrity and purpose is what gives firepower its genuine strength. These attributes were abundantly displayed by ninjas, leaving a lasting impression on their enemies, and guaranteeing that Earth would be remembered as a site of unexpected insight and knowledge rather than as a primitive backwater. Resiliency. In the end, the ninjas and the cosmic assassins split apart not as adversaries, but as creatures who had come to. The ninjas demonstrated that even the most sophisticated technology may help people comprehend one another in fundamental and revolutionary ways, could be vanquished by the assassins for everyone with the correct mix of talent, knowledge, and resolve. It was a win, not merely because their original haughtiness had grown to accept a force they had previously written off as archaic for the ninjas, but also for the principles they stood for, which demonstrated the resilience of people who choose not to be undervalued. The ninja encounter, which left the Galactic assassins essentially. Thus, they returned to their territory as a collectively humbled entity rather than as an unchallenged powerhouse. Failures on Earth had shown a weakness they had never recognized, but had now realized. Power in a unique manner based on technology and brute force, but Earth's silent killers exposed a different one that depended on flexibility, self-retreat, and a thorough awareness of one's surroundings. For the Galactic assassins, this encounter made them reevaluate who they were, as they had always thought their accumulated and advanced. Their advanced equipment and weapons provided them an advantage no opponent could match. Therefore, their domination was undeniable. Ninjas had destroyed this illusion without ever having to fight them head-on. With every defeat they faced had eroded their self-confidence, leaving them with the harsh reality that technology, no matter how brilliant it looks and feels, is more important than technology. This lesson started to show that ingenuity and resilience were more important than superior technology. She changed how the assassins approached their boss by considering what has happened on Earth. Realized that they needed to alter, since the ninjas had demonstrated to them how dependent they were on regularity. exposed people who might act and believe differently than the norms. As time went on, the assassins began to apply the ideas they had seen to their own techniques, started receiving instruction in the skill of adaptability as well as tool use, learning to watch and react to their surroundings in ways they had never thought of before. Among the biggest shifts was their change in how individuals perceive other civilizations and cultures, that they now approached such interactions cautiously because they believed that less developed nations were inferior and undeserving of significant consideration. And regard that Earth has demonstrated even a seemingly archaic system might have protected its people from access to precious tools and resources that were appalling. The assassins began to value observation over conjecture in an effort to identify capabilities that were invisible to outsiders, comprehend their goal before acting. This modification not only increased their effectiveness, but also provided opportunities. Offering fresh perspectives on the ninjas' place in the universe, the encounter left no discernible evidence, as their triumph was not in the form of awards or proclamations, but in the knowledge that they had safeguarded their environment and way of life without empathy for their truth or loss. By sacrificing their values, they demonstrated that the real test of strength is not external exhibits, but in the quiet assurance of understanding who you are and what you stand for. Their behavior had maintained the equilibrium they aimed to preserve, making sure that the assassins departed Earth with more questions than answers. The lessons learned by the assassins went beyond the battlefield. They realized that their goal wasn't not only about removing dangers, but also about understanding life's intricacies, and the subtleties of the ninjas' might made them face their own shortcomings and think about the wider effects of what they were doing. Realized that although their triumphs were remarkable, they frequently came at the expense of comprehending the worlds they encountered. This insight, which caused them to reevaluate their priorities and adopt a more careful and thorough approach for Earth, this collision had a minor but significant impact. In order to ensure that the planet would no again be viewed as an easy target, the cosmic assassins departed with a renewed respect for it. Attack the ninjas, who have always been hidden and whose legacy is kept in the cutting edge and tall fortresses, hadn't been the source of the hidden lessons they had taught about Earth's defenses, technology, but from a strong bond with the land, a mastery of stealth, and an unwavering faith in the discipline. The encounter's wider ramification was that the assassins' perception of themselves changed. Always viewed their position as one of power and dominance, using force to impose their will on others. But they had been shown a different way by the ninjas, one of tactful tolerance and respect for the difficulties presented by even the tiniest enemy. This insight not only altered their strategy, but also their perpetual perplexity. They started to regard themselves as learners, who aimed to develop from every new experience rather than merely as conquerors. Instead of just overwhelming it, the tale of the ninjas and the Galactic assassins eventually became a cult hit. It demonstrated the enduring power of flexibility and modesty by showing that even those who recognized the value of looking beyond the obvious may make sophisticated technology useless. Evidently, it served as a reminder that power isn't solely about possessions, but also about how you use them, and that occasionally the greatest triumphs come from learning from your adversaries rather than from beating them. For the Galactic assassins, more than just a humiliating experience, the contact with Earth's silent killers marked a sea change that changed the ninjas' sense of self and how they viewed the cosmos. It was just another phase in their lengthy history of defending their planet, was a silent confirmation of their guiding ideals, and for Earth, it was a turning point. They illustrated the strength of adaptability and endurance, as well as the wisdom of customs that have endured time. Both parties departed, the conflict shifted, and the assassins went back to their galaxies with a renewed appreciation for the unexpected, as the ninjas carried on their covert operations. Invisible but constantly alert, their encounter left a lesson of change rather than destruction. Strength can take many different forms, and even the most unlikely adversary may have the secret to realizing what it is, what it means to be strong.